Hi, I'm Jay Richards, and we are here in Bellevue, Washington at the COSM 2022 conference, and we're talking with some of the speakers, a lot of exciting debates and panels about the future of blockchain, the future of Web 3.0, the future of AI, the future of China, and lots of interesting and controversial subjects. And we just got finished actually with a panel about blockchain and Web 3.0. And so I am here actually with Kate Laurence, who was the moderator of the session. And Kate is the CEO and general partner of Bloccelerate VC here in Seattle.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's good to be with you. And so I know we had not met before, and so but you're here in Seattle at the moment, right?
Yes, and our firm is also headquartered here in Seattle. We've been around since 2018, invested about $22 million into 22 companies, had 2 exits, and backed 1 unicorn.
Oh, okay. And so do you focus specifically on blockchain technology?
Yes, that's our fundamental thesis, is that blockchain technology is going to create trillions of dollars worth of new wealth over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yep.
And we're backing companies that are building on top of it.
Okay, so you moderated a panel by Joe Lubin, who's the CEO of Consensus, and then George Gilder, who's of course the convener of this session.
Pioneers.
Yeah, pioneers, exactly. It's called The Future of the Self-Sovereign Web 3 Economy. So what does that title mean for people that don't know anything about the subject?
Right. So maybe the first step is to define what Web 3 is. And we define Web 3 as the future of the internet. Mm-hmm. We had 2 previous iterations of the internet, which was Web 1, Web 2, and now we have Web 3.
So what was 1?
Web 1 was read-only web. Mm-hmm. So you can think of it as your bank finally has a web page, but it's a static web page. You still have to go to the bank in order to place a trade, but you can actually see the price of a stock online.
Gotcha.
That's Web 1. Then Web 2 came around, which was right around late 90s, and you can think of it as read and write web. So not only can you see the price of the stock, you can actually place a trade online, and that was the emergence of E-Trade, as well as the social media giants that we have today, like YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and so forth. So Web 3 is the next iteration of the internet, and it's read, write, and own. So now you don't have to trust a bank, you don't need a bank, you don't need an E-Trade. You and I can transact through a smart contract in a completely self-sovereign way. And that is the root cause of our name of this session. The self-sovereignty aspect goes very deep in the ethos of Web 3. You don't need to trust an intermediary, you have full ownership of your data, money, and assets. So
the blockchain depends crucially then, or rather the Web 3.0 depends crucially on this technology of blockchain. I mean, how do you explain blockchain, which is very esoteric to the non-specialists, but for the people that are just, ask you on the elevator, what do you say?
In a simple way to understand, it's a way for multiple stakeholders to come see a single version of truth on a common denominator, without having to trust a centralized entity. So if you and I want to agree on the state of the weather today, we go to a weather app, and that weather app serves as an intermediary for us to decide the truth on the weather. The idea of a blockchain, you don't need a centralized weather app. You can have a decentralized weather app. And obviously, I'm simplifying it. Weather is not a disputable topic.
Right.
But there's a lot of disputable topics out there, in which cases you don't want to trust a centralized app to tell you the truth. And that's the idea of decentralization.
And that was the kind of key theme of the session, was this question between centralization and decentralization. And of course, most people that know anything about blockchain will know something, maybe Bitcoin or something. Maybe it's the only example they know of blockchain technology. So blockchain technology is the sort of broader genus of which Bitcoin is maybe a species, right? It's a currency. And so people think of the relevant third-party institution there would be presumably a bank, right? And so could blockchain currencies do without a bank, for instance?
So the best way to think about Bitcoin, it's the first use case of the Web3 technology. Similar to how email was the first use case of the internet. Email is not the only and the last use case of the internet. There's a lot of use cases to the internet. Similarly, Bitcoin is the first use case, but not the only and the last use case of the internet. Bitcoin brought payments, store of value on chain, payments as a service, transmitting value, But now, as we've evolved since 2008, we have seen Ethereum come about, and we had Joe talk about the story, the founding story of Ethereum, which is a world computer that serves as a trust layer for this new Web3 economy, on top of which we're now building decentralized finance, decentralized science, decentralized media, NFTs, non-fungible tokens, creator economy. So there's a proliferation of new use cases that are built on top of this foundation of blockchain.
So the other thing that was actually discussed, and Joe, I thought, responded to this, but this worry, at least with Bitcoin, that of course you need greater and greater amounts of computational power and so energy in order to keep this thing going. And he described something that Ethereum has done that has made that, at least seems to significantly have solved that problem. What is that exactly?
So the fundamental consensus algorithm of Ethereum from inception was called proof of work. Proof of work means you have to have computational power, which is highly energy inefficient, in order to run the computations in a decentralized manner. And in my career, when I started learning about Ethereum, the first thing I did is I attended a mining meetup. I wanted to learn how do you mine Ethereum. And then I set up a mining rig in my house because I wanted to participate in this economy. So up until this year, Ethereum was operating on this proof of work consensus algorithm, which was consuming significant amount of energy. Now they moved to proof of stake as of September of this year, which successfully went through, meaning that you no longer have to have computational intensity in order to confirm transaction. You confirm transactions by showing stake in the system, which is a completely novel mechanism that now reduced the energy consumption by 99.9% in this Ethereum ecosystem.
I mean, that seems really, really significant for, because this was the primary objection to this, is that this is going to use increasingly large amounts of energy in order for the system to work. And so they seem maybe to have solved that problem.
They solved that problem, and now it's certainly not an objection by any skeptics out there saying that running blockchain is energy consuming.
So George, in this session, talked about blockchain as both allowing potentially micropayments, but also a kind of privacy and a capacity for people to get their own information back, so they own their information, unlike the sort of Google free model where you are actually the product. I mean, what's he talking about? What is the thinking behind that? Do you know?
Well, the internet fundamentally has evolved to capitalize and monetize on user data. They said data is the new oil and Facebook is the new standard oil. That is the current status quo of the Web 2 internet. The idea of the Web 3 is we can actually do better. Instead of letting the tech giants monetize your personal data, you have a way to control and monetize your personal data. And it goes beyond data. For example, we can think of creators who produce art. They can retain ownership in their art pieces in secondary transactions. That's not something you can do when a centralized intermediary is handling your art, which is the case in the Web 2 world. So the idea is now, instead of the tech oligopolies controlling and monetizing your data, you distribute that ownership, and therefore you distribute the value creation that this space has produced.
I mean, see, when you describe it that way, it seems like a really exciting prospect. But of course, I'm just speaking for myself. I'm still in the world of Twitter and, of course, Amazon and Facebook. And so, I mean, where are we, if you were going to prognosticate, in terms of this transition from Web 2 to Web 3?
I would say we're probably right around 1998, 1997 of the internet. We actually just did some research on the subject of data or user adoption. In 1998, we had 300 million users in the web. Today, we have 300 million users in crypto.
Wow.
So in terms of usage, we're right around that 98.
And so we're at that moment when Google suddenly went online and people started using it. So
in 98, we had a lot of issues with the internet.
Yeah.
Bandwidth was bad. We didn't have Google.
Yes.
We didn't have Facebook. We didn't have a killer app except for email for the most part. And it took a few years to develop. But we actually talked about it this morning with Joe, and the consensus is that unlike what we experienced in 98, we now have internet on top of which we build.
Yes.
We already have bandwidth. So the time that it's going to take to get to mainstream adoption is likely going to be faster than what we've experienced with the internet, which took, 20 years or so.
Well, so who has a stake in preventing this from happening?
When you create a new system that challenges the status quo, you threaten the powers of centralized incumbents. And centralized incumbents first deny you, then they fight you, and then they join you. I think we are at the point of centralized incumbents openly joining the movement. We have seen JP Morgan invest in this space quite significantly. Google Cloud just announced a partnership with Coinbase. Aladdin clients now can trade crypto. So we have certainly a recognition that this technology is real, but if we were to look back at what happened in the internet, most of the incumbents did not succeed in disrupting themselves.
Right.
We had new companies that came and won. So my guess, and I think that was the consensus from the panel today, is that in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see unbundling of these tech giants, and new networks or companies will come about to disrupt them.
So what was, if there was one main disagreement between Joe and George, it seemed like the disagreements were under the surface, because on the surface they seemed mostly to agree, but were there any fundamental disagreements in the panel?
So maybe where we didn't quite have the agreement, and maybe because we haven't had enough time to explore, is the idea of the firm. If you recall, I asked the question, are firms going to be around? Centralized firms.
And you quoted Coase's famous, insight that every business student knows about firms presumably lowering transaction costs, and so that's the reason.
George's point was that it's not about lowering the transaction costs, but it's about human creativity and knowledge. That is what's the motivating factor behind the enterprise. But the idea, if you can create a decentralized autonomous organization that collectively accumulates and shares that knowledge in an autonomous and programmable way that's much more efficient and effective than a centralized enterprise, then what is the point of a centralized enterprise? So I think that's a point of debate, if you will, that we still need to explore further.
Absolutely. So that's a subject for further discussion.
Next COSM.
Absolutely. Kate, Laurence, great to be with you and get to know you. You did a terrific job actually of explaining this, so thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
I'm Jay Richards, and we are at the COSM 2022 conference here in Washington State. Thanks for joining us.